Welcome to the Case by Casey podcast, the podcast where we uncover kingdom secrets to success so you can walk in the power of the Holy Spirit. My name is Jethro Casey, and my mission is simple. It's to bring on men and women of God to share the secrets that God has taught them to be spiritually successful as well as successful in the world. Also, I'll be sharing what God reveals to me on my own walk with Christ. So if you're ready to grow spiritually, stick around and let's grow. Hey, what's up, guys? Back with another episode of Case by Casey. I know it's been a while. A lot of things have been going on, but I want to come back here and we're going to be doing a rebranding, I believe, soon. I want to start off with somebody who I met recently. We're part of the same men's group called The Standard. And I'll be bringing on a bunch of guests from The Standard in this new year. And I just want to introduce my guest. He's the host of the Afrobeats podcast, which is inspired by culture and soul. It's where his guests will use food and nature to explore the African diaspora. He's a cookbook enthusiast as well. He has his own coaching business where he teaches people how to create a garden in their own space. Lastly, he's a speaker for garden-based conferences and basically really anything with a Black diaspora. And he started his nature journey back in 2017, if I'm correct. And I welcome Christin Riddick to the podcast. Did I say your last name right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
awesome.
Man. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I guess just start us off, like obviously the podcast, where the rebranding of the podcast is going to go from uncovering the secret to success to kingdom secrets of success. So the body or the Bible talks about the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. So go us through, like, I guess, starting your nature journey in 2017. Where were you physically? And just how did you get into it and all of that?
Yeah, man. Physically, I was a wild kid. You know, I was a kid who was doing a little bit of everything, exploring, just trying to figure out his way through life. I was at the time working in this AmeriCorps program called City Year. Mm-hmm. And it's a program basically where you spend a year going into service and working in schools. And then if you do a second year with them, you serve as like a mentor, tutor, and role model for students in the classroom. Second year, you have opportunity to do things like civic engagement. So it's out, doing building gardens. It's doing murals. It's just helping the community at large. And so at that time, I would describe myself as like down for anything, especially when it came to like food. When someone asks basically, oh, I don't really want this. Does anybody want to eat this? I'm like, first one up, like, just give it to me. I'll eat it, Yeah, as long as it's edible, like that was my vibe. And so the way I got into this space was, it was actually through service. Mm. So there was an MLK service day through the organization that I just mentioned. And I ran into this entrepreneur. His name was Josh, and he owned this business called About Fresh. Mm. And the business model of About Fresh is something called Fresh Truck. So basically what they do is they take old school buses and convert them to produce on wheels. Mm. They had the concept of like, there are people in our neighborhoods that are food insecure. Maybe they don't have the ability to go out and go to the grocery store, or they just live too far away. Let's bring the grocery store to the people, basically. And so they take these old school buses, rip the chairs out, and put produce stands in them, and would fill it with like fruits, vegetables, different things like that. And I actually got to go inside of the truck and see how it worked. And something that day just kind of like inspired me. I was like, yo, what is this? Like, what are these terms they're talking about? They're talking about food desert, food apartheid. For people who don't know, those terms basically mean like the systematic reasoning why certain communities don't have access to fresh foods. So you think about, your space, and you think about how long does it take me to get to the grocery store? Do I have access to a car to get to the grocery store? What is the quality of the food in the grocery store? So a lot of people are living in food secure spaces. For instance, where I'm from, DC area, we have our communities broken up into wards, right? Different parts of the city. In the more affluent wards in DC, say maybe like Ward 3, Ward 5, you might have like 13 grocery stores in one ward, right? And those are people who are living with, they have a lot of money. They tend to be on whiter side. And then you have Ward 7 and Ward 8, which are lower in income. And they also tend to have more communities of color. And they, between them, only probably have like 4 grocery stores. and they're not of quality. So you have 13 in one ward, higher influence, more white people. And then you have, 4 between 2 wards that are traditionally lower income Black communities. And so that always puzzled me. I always wanted to know the reason why it was like that and the systematic approaches behind that. And so I went down this rabbit hole and said, all right, I'm going to start growing food. My solution to this is like, I need to start with me first and figure out how can I grow? How can I be sustainable? And so from there, it just kind of like took off. I started doing that. I started documenting my journey online, and people were asking me, they're like, yo, you're eating a lot of like vegetables. You're eating well. I see you starting to grow some things. Like, teach me how to do that. Like, help me with my plants. And so I started like mentoring others, and I was like, there could be something here. I'm passionate about this. I feel really good about this. I feel like it has a benefit for the community. And how can I turn this?
What year was that, Christian, when people started asking you? Because like this was like, did you start your journey in 2017, or was it even earlier than that? And when did people start like seeking your advice?
I would say 2018, like the year after I had done it long enough, which is very interesting because I also, I was going through a lot of changes at the time, right? This is at a time when I'm coming out of college, 2 years, not really having a stable job. I mean, AmeriCorps is great and it gives you a lot of life skills, but it's not stability unless you get an actual job there, And so that being said, one of the things that happened while I was in AmeriCorps is I made a bet with somebody, one of my friends who was on my team. He noticed that I was eating a lot of vegetables. And he was like, yo, what's going on with you? Are you vegan now? Are you like plant-based or whatever like that? I was like, no, but I could be. And they're like, man, you can't be plant-based. Like, come on. Like, I know you. You eat like this. You do this, And I was like, nah, I'm going to do it for 2 weeks. I'll show you. And, from there, 2 weeks, I was like, yo, I was joking about this. This is a bet, but I actually feel really good right now. Like, I feel like I got superpowers. And so what happened was I started adopting a plant-based lifestyle. So gardening not only changed what I was doing on the outside, but it started changing me internally as well. Because I realized fresh food comes from the land. I always knew fresh food comes from the land, but I didn't know until I really got my hands in the soil.
So something that interesting that you said is like, it's gonna start with you first. And I feel like whenever a lot of people are trying to do things, a lot of times you can get like so absorbed in like the big picture. And I think that mentality of starting with me first, especially like not just only on our success journey, but on this like Christian walk as well, is like, I feel like a lot of people can get super zealous, which is amazing, and kind of at least put their attention on too many people. Like, oh, there's wrong. Like I'm going through Matthew right now, and Jesus talks about like the log in your own eye and getting those things resolved first before you try and help other people. So I love that you shared that. And it's also like you mentioned, I feel like people will seek like you once you start to like share value and add value. Like I'm assuming that wasn't even something that you were necessarily looking for, but it started like coming to you like, oh, teach me about this and this and this. And I think that's awesome. Could you go a little deeper onto the wards part? Cause I didn't know that was a thing. Yeah. I never knew about that.
And I can give you resources on the actual numbers. I'm giving you an example, but the proximity there is about right. But so yeah, DC, the way DC is mapped out, there's about 8 wards. And so the way it's sectioned off, if you imagine DC as kind of like, so DC is, you have Maryland on the top, you have Virginia on the bottom. There's a beltway that circles that all around, and then it's broken up into 4 quadrants, kind of like a kite. So there's like northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast. Typically, the neighborhoods I was talking about that don't have as much access as some of the other wards to the north are typically in that like southeast area, and that's across the Anacostia River. And so it's very intentional the way the city is mapped out, what resources go where. So a lot of those communities that don't have access to a lot of foods live in that kind of like southeast region. It's not everywhere. Now DC has a food desert problem or a food apartheid problem in general. Being the nation's capital, it's kind of crazy that we have some of the most food insecure people in the communities there. And so there's this big, I would say it's not a resurgence because it's been happening a while, but there's this big movement of urban gardening, especially in the DC area. And so that's one of the reasons I kind of came back home, because I was like, I got to do it here first before I go anywhere else.
And I guess, Christian, what's kind of like your vision for this? Because obviously you're starting right now in terms of helping people in their their own like homes, their safe spaces, their maybe small spaces in the city. I guess what's your vision? Do you eventually want to like be a full time, like, I don't know, what's your vision? Yeah.
Yeah. Man, I got big dreams, man. Like, for at least the podcast, I want to be on kind of, I don't know if you ever seen High on the Hog. There's a guy named Steven Satterfield, and he is kind of like an Anthony Bourdain type figure. He goes around the world exploring food, telling the narratives of Black people in the food space. And it's like, on that scale, I want to be able to make a show out of that and show people how diverse the African diaspora is, and show them the land. I connect people to the land. My mission overall is just to connect people to land. So whether that be through growing your own food, whether that be, putting the food in your body, or just getting out in nature and getting active, I want people to be connected, because I think it's just going to make their life better overall in so many different aspects.
Yeah, and dive into, like, I guess when you talk about like food, nature, and exploring the African diaspora. I think I said it wrong the first time, but like, what is that? What does that mean? And like, if somebody's never heard of that word, like, could you just like give us like a breakdown?
Yeah. So African diaspora is like people who have African origin from the continent. So it means it's a very complex term, because you have people who are born in Africa and then they leave and go to other parts of the world. They're part of the African diaspora, but also us as Black Americans, we're a part of the African diaspora too, even though might not have seen the continents, because we have roots in Africa. So the African diaspora is like people of African origin in different parts of the world. And it's the most diverse collection of people than you can even imagine. A lot of times we get boxed into Black, if people see us, you might see, say like a Nigerian dude and a Jamaican dude, and some people might just categorize them as they're Black people. But to me, those are very big differences. But at the same time, they're also similarities, right? So for instance, like, I like growing crops that are specifically to the African diaspora. So one of those crops, one of my favorite things to grow is Scotch bonnet peppers. Now, Scotch bonnet peppers are actually used in jerk sauce in Jamaican cuisine. So like when people are doing chicken, when they're doing patties, they're making the sauce with this super hot, and it's kind of like it has a fruitiness to it. It's just really delicious. So they're making it with that sauce. So Jamaicans use that in sauce and stews and things like that. But Nigerians also do that. They might put it in like their jollof rice. They might do it in some of their stews and things that they have got going on. But the dishes are very different. And so there's a connection there, but there's a whole different culture. But you can also cut the thing that really attracted me about gardening is, I always tell people there's two ways to time travel, right? You can either save a seed and plant it for another day, or you can save a recipe and cook that and learn about the history behind that dish. That's, to me, the only way I've seen to go back in time. And so when I'm also cooking, I'm also telling stories of the people that came before me, and just continuing to bring that legacy along. That's why recipes are so important. That's why family history is so important.
That's powerful. And I think the title for the episode is now going to be Planting a Seed. And I want to talk about a little bit more, I guess, about your Christian journey. Did anybody plant a seed for you going into your faith? And now, as you've been like, I'm not sure where your relationship is, but like, as you've been growing in your faith, or wherever you are in your journey, I guess, who's the first person to plant a seed? We'll get back to the show in just a moment. But quick question. Are you wanting to see the manifestation of God in your life? Reading all of the amazing stories in the Bible and might be asking yourself, why am I not experiencing this in my life? Well, there is a way, and this podcast is one that is set to bring you kingdom secrets to success that I'm learning from men and women of God, as well as what God is teaching me daily. Stay up to date with all the new episodes and weekly spiritual nuggets that I'll be sharing by joining the Case by KC newsletter. The link is in the description and show notes below. Now, let's get back into the episode. For you?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's always been there. The seed has always been there. My family is big into, God has done a lot for my family. We do not look like what we've been through because of God's presence in our lives. And from the get-go, my family on both sides is filled with ministers and educators and pastors. And so prayer was always a big part of my life. I always had people praying for me. I always had people showing me their walk with God through their faith. And even though I knew they were going through stuff, I always saw that they had a belief that God could do it. You know, he could get you out of any situation. And so it started from there. It started by showing up by example, you know. And I just started adopting those things. And I've really, over the last year, been reconnecting with God on my own level and saying, okay, I know God, but I want to know God. Like, I want to know for myself, and diving into the word and saying, okay, like, for instance, I had to figure out, you know, what was my family scripture going to be? Like, what is the thing that really pushes me and motivates me? And I think about Matthew chapter 17, verse 21. And it talks about the faith of a mustard seed, right? It talks about, you know, if you believe you can move mountains, you can do anything. And that is really special to me. And I love reading the Bible now, especially as a person who's in agriculture and gardening, because there's so many, oh man, there's so many hits, and it hits different when you know agriculture and you know about growing, and then they make those comparisons, you know, like a mustard seed. Mustard seed is like a speck on your finger. So that's all you need to have faith. If you have that, you can move mountains. Like, that is such a powerful metaphor, a powerful analogy. You know?
And what I've noticed, at least, so I was raised Catholic, and then I kind of like departed from. I feel like a lot of people who are at least were raised Catholic, and or I guess maybe this is in Christians in general, get to like the age where they kind of just stop going to church or whatever the case may be, and you kind of just like go through like exploring. And I would say, like, for you in your journey, obviously coming from a Christian household, sounds like it was like very strong faith. Being around ministers and maybe pastors, preachers, did you have any expectation for yourself to kind of live that lifestyle as well?
You know, I've been thinking about that because I always felt like it was in me. But I think the church is changing. And I think also not everyone has to, everybody is in ministry in some kind of way, even if they don't know it. Like, your testimony, your life, the way you live, you are in ministry already. Like, I already see myself as a minister because I'm living life. I'm a Christian, so I try to walk the right way, and I try to show up how I need to show up. And so whether you're a cook, whether you're working at Walmart, whether you're, you know, serving our country, like, you're showing up for God, whether you know it or not. It's like, how do you show up in that way? And so that's how I think about it. It's like, I'm already in it. I don't need a title or a position to do that. There's somebody that I can touch that no one else can touch through the work that I do. And so I'd say I don't take that lightly.
Yeah, and I think that's powerful. And I think also, as us being like podcast hosts, I remember my girlfriend had said, like, this platform, like being a podcaster, it's kind of like being at like a pulpit, like you're preaching to people, like people are giving you their ear. So like diving into your podcast, what was the I guess the beginnings of the podcast? Because I'm very interested in like how you started and what was the initial vision, and now how it's transforming. Because you mentioned that eventually down the line, you obviously want to have like a real like show.
Yeah. The podcast started as a way to just document and to talk. I think I was going through like this vegan journey, and that was a big part of the podcast earlier on. So a lot of my early guests are actually like vegan chefs, people who are figuring out the lifestyle. And then it slowly transitioned to just an exploration. It was me being curious about everything that this space could entail, and expanding my horizon a little bit, you know. So now, of course, I still have people who talk about like plant-based eating and stuff like that, because that's just part of it. But those three levels that I was talking about, to me, those are in its own ecosystem. So when I teach people about growing food, I don't just stop there. After you grow food, what do you do with that food? You have to cook it and prepare it. How do you make that relevant to your culture? After you consume that food, get the nutrients and know what's good for your body, what are you doing with that energy? Let's go out into nature. Let's go for a walk. Let's hike. Let's rock climb. So it was a culmination of all of that as the podcast progressed. And now it's like, I am not an expert. I realize I could take a lifetime just doing the things that I'm interested in and not get very far. But if I could get someone whose whole life is being really good at this one thing and then get an hour, half an hour of their time, man, I can learn a lot in that time. So the podcast is a little bit selfish in that way, that I'm curious. I want to know. I want to talk to the people who are the best at what they do so I can get to my goals faster. But I also want to help people along the way and say, oh, I love the people who like comment on there. They're like, yo, you're really putting me on to like some things I didn't know we did this. I think that's a big one goal for the podcast is like, my goal is I want to build the future leaders of the food, agriculture, and environmental space. I want to talk to young me who might have an affinity for the land and say, yo, you could be this. You could be this, and give them that opportunity. So I think that's where I'm headed more than anything. I think I lost you. I think you're on mute, my man.
Yeah, I was saying, I have so many questions that I want to put a stamp in like the three spheres, like you mentioned, the growing the food, like what do you do with the food, mm-hmm. and then going into nature. And then you also mentioning like going out and rock climbing as well, and then affinity to the land. So I guess the first question is, like, what did your first bouldering experience at Bouldering Project kind of like teach you just about, I would say like maybe perseverance, success, life, faith, whatever connection you made there?
Yeah, man, you do your research. Okay. The bouldering was a new hobby I picked up last year, and it taught me obviously about perseverance, but it also taught me, taking it one rock at a time, taking it one brick at a time, one step at a time. How do you get from here to there, not here to there, And that was important for me because I'm such a visionary. I've already got plans for like 20, 30 years down the line. And sometimes I want to jump and be like, all right, let's get there faster. But it's like, no, I need you to be present so you can figure out to get from A to B, not A to Z. Like focus on that little step. And so that's what bouldering teaches me. It teaches me about community. It teaches me about fear. Because no matter how many times you do it, you're never sure if you'll land that next rock. You're never sure if you'll make the right grab. You'll never sure if you'll approach the next step the right way. But you'll know for sure because at some point you'll get tired of staying where you're at and you have to move. You're either going down or you're going up. So pick one. I'd rather go up just because at least I learn on the way down if I fall. But if you never try, you never learn. The way with bouldering to progress faster is to mess up as many times as you can safely. But yeah.
So do you feel like that relates to life in general? Because obviously, like the Bible says, like we don't carry a spirit of fear, but a power of love and a sound mind. So like obviously in success, and I think just pursuing success or anything, your goals, there's always going to be that hint of fear. So would you say that kind of applies to real life as well, or is it specifically just in that one activity?
Are you asking me, like, do I fear? Like, how do I deal with that fear?
Yeah.
Rephrase the question.
Yeah, in terms of, like, having that fear of, like, you're not sure if you're going to get to the next, like, rock. Do you feel like that applies to you in life, or are you more certain with, like, oh, I know I'm going to get this. I know I'm going to get this. I might, like, make some mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, man. I'm fearful all the time. I'm fearful of stuff, after this podcast is done. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get to where I need to go down the line, but I'm just going to take it day by day. I think it's fear and then doing it anyway, because there's nothing, it's hard. I kind of categorize things in life into two categories. I feel like it's either a lesson or a blessing, The only time I feel like I actually lose is when I don't try at all because I'm stuck. There's nothing there. So if I don't quote unquote win, which win is subjective, because learning the lesson could be the win. But people get so caught up in failure and then being embarrassed and looking bad. And to be fair, that's how we're taught. When we're in school, they teach us that failure is not something to desire after.
Mm-hmm.
You should be ashamed of the failure. You should be striving for straight A's. They red pen our failures on our papers.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, what I've learned, at least especially in the last couple of years, is that failure is not the end all be all. It's actually the prerequisite to being successful. There is no real success without failure. And so I'm like, okay, if that's true, how can I take as many L's, as many lessons as I can in a manner that's quick, in a manner that doesn't cost me a lot, and just do it efficiently. Just be strategic about your L. Be strategic about how you're going to fail. Don't do it where it's going to hurt you down the line, but don't be afraid to take the short-term loss as well.
So what has that looked like for you in your journey, especially maybe it's with your podcast or your business or whatever the case may be? What has been like, I guess, ways of learning or taking these L's to learn quickly and learn faster for you?
Yeah, actually, last year I officially launched my coaching service, and I had my first 3 kind of like customers for it. And looking at the end of it, some might see it as a failure, to be honest, because I didn't finish getting them the results they needed for that. And so what I'm doing now is taking a look at that. I was like, okay, what went wrong? How can I make this process better to get people the results faster and condense it a little bit more? So I'm in the process of it right now. I'm trying to figure that out. I'm trying to figure out what I went wrong. But the way I got there faster was accountability. So I had another guy in Standard, Alexander. He actually helped me out. He was like, I was telling him what I'm about to do with the coaching service and stuff like that. And I was like, I got this launch idea. I'm doing like that. And he was like, yo, why don't you do it next week? And I was like, oh, why can't I do it next week? And he helped me out. He was like, yo, shoot me the email that you're going to send out for the launch. Do it by this date. I want to see it. I want to hold you accountable to it. I was like, all right, bet. And so I did it, and then it worked out. And I was so happy when I got my first, 3 clients. Like, even though I'm still learning and I'm still working with them and trying to get them there, I'm happy because I did it. I took the first step, and I learned so much from it. And I know it's going to take time, and I know I'm incrementally going to be getting better. And I have bigger goals this year, but I'm going to learn from what I learned last year and build on that.
And then in your coaching, I guess going back to the affinity part, the 3, I guess, like steps, going to the infinity part, what does that look like in terms of, I guess, the coaching aspect of it, and as well as just like the everyday person? Let's say somebody just wants to, or they think they might have like an infinity to the, I guess, the land, like you were mentioning. What does that look like? How would you know if you're somebody who has that and that?
That's a really good question. It starts with looking at your past experiences and finding out what you gravitate to. So I used to be a teacher, and I used to see a lot of potential in kids for different things and would kind of sometimes speak to that, but sometimes I would miss it and I didn't speak up enough, and I should have like pushed them a little more. But to be fair, they were in 2nd grade, so a lot of 2nd graders aren't thinking about their whole life ahead of them. But that's an example of like seeing in yourself. You have to be self-aware and you have to be present in order to see it. So there's kids right now that would make a great archaeologist, or somebody who can study bugs. You see a kid playing with like bugs and insects and stuff like that. There's jobs for that. I can't even remember. I think it's called like, I gotta find there's a specific, I've been doing podcast outreach, and I was like, I want somebody who specializes in insects. And there's a specific job title for insects. I'll let you know when I find it. I can't think of it right now. But like, it's a person that looks just like me, that's just about insects. And that's what they're passionate about. See what your experiences are growing up. For me, I'll say for me, the way I found it was I looked at my past experiences. And sometimes those experiences are wrapped in pain, what is in my circumstance. So for me, I lost my dad when I was 15. to cancer. And that was like a huge, like, that was like, for anybody who's seen Spider-Man, that was like my canon moment, you know? That was just like, I got to figure out how something to do with my life to make this feel like this was worth it, or like, you know, I have to make my life something for him, and to show up for him the same way he showed up for me. And so what happened with that, and I didn't even realize this until maybe a couple years after I had started, but what really drives me to do this work is not wanting to see other people go through what I do. So there's a big health and wellness component to what I do, and realizing like a lot of the things and the health concerns that are going on with people getting sick earlier, having cancer and things like that, has to do with our lifestyle and what we eat and how we interact with the natural state of things. And so I didn't even know that was in me until I, you know, sat down with like a therapist, sat down with myself and said, why are you so passionate about this? Like, this is hard work. Like, why do you want to do this? And it's like, I want someone, if I could like help someone become healthier, live their best life, put more years on their life because I taught them how to grow their own food, or I taught them how to engage with nature and take a health approach rather than like more of a traditional approach with like medicine, then I feel like I would be doing something.
And I think that's huge because obviously I think people are just going to live longer. And I think this is something I literally at my job, I was talking to this guy and he's like, he has chickens. And I was like, you have chickens. That's pretty cool. And he's like, yeah, they lay like 2 to 6 eggs a day. And I'm like, whoa, like, and he has like his own family. And that was just like interesting to me because like in that, it's like, in that it's like self-sustaining, like, oh, like even like the eggs are expensive, obviously, but just like learning things like that. And I think going back to nature a bit, and this is something I want to do in the future, is definitely have like my own, like growing my own food, because I think you never know what's going to happen. I think also just like the connecting part, like where you're saying the affinity, I'm not sure if I necessarily have an affinity, but I remember I went to Panama once and it was like a service retreat, and just being able to like touch the land and like we were like picking stuff and I was like, yo, this is hard work. My back was hurting and all that. And I guess the transition, you made a post back in 2019 titled Learn Like You're Still a Kid, and we were just talking about your teaching experience. And when you you said that you like oftentimes kids are easier to teach versus adults because they may have an ego when they're trying to learn. So how do you yourself remain like teachable and kind of crush your ego when it comes to learning something new?
Yeah. I think I have fun. I have fun still. I'm a very goofy guy. Like, I like to have a good time. I'm very playful. And so I know when I start something, I'm going to be bad at it. So why not enjoy the process of it? You know, so I come at it at that approach. I think I also come at it as there's always room to grow. And there's always room to learn. There's always somebody better than you at whatever you do. You walk into the right room, you're going to be the lowest person on the branch, to say. And so knowing that, I don't take myself as seriously. I want to humble myself because I want to learn. I think more about how am I better than I was 3 months ago, and try to break it up that way. Because if I feel like I'm progressing and I'm slowly building up, it doesn't matter where everyone else is. You don't know where I came from. You don't know where my start point was. And so I'm progressing. Who knows? I'll eventually get there. Maybe I'll surpass you, maybe I won't, but I'm going to keep going and I'm going to be consistent with it. And so sometimes it's a little bit of a chip on my shoulder and just like wanting to keep pace and wanting to thrive over people. But then sometimes it's just like I'm having fun. That's it.
And where did you like begin to develop this, or did you always kind of have this like a sense of, I guess, because it sounds like you're not very worried about like other people's paths or really focus on your own journey. And I know nowadays like social media, viewing other people's stories, seeing their highlights can definitely make a lot of people feel some certain type of way. So how did you always have this, or was this something you developed? And if it was, like, how did you become this person?
I'm still working on it. I'm reading this book currently called Digital Minimalism. And right now I'm kind of doing like a digital fast for like a month where I'm limiting just across technology in general. And you have to give yourself, this is why nature is good for this. If you force yourself to just cut off your phone and go for a walk, even if it's like 30 minutes a day, you'll find that stuff will just start flooding to you. Ideas, concepts, insights. But you have to be quiet. And you have to be comfortable with being bored. You have to be comfortable with those thoughts flooding in. Some people are drowning themselves in tech and the voices of other people because they don't want to hear their own voice because they're scared of what they have to deal with on the other side of that.
And you know what I really think it is, because I'm reading this book right now. It's called, or I just finished reading this book called Deep Work, and it basically talks about I kind of focus in on work, and he talks about the same thing, like kind of technology fasting as well. But he talks about one of the famous philosopher, maybe it wasn't a philosopher, I forgot his name, but he's like super popular, like revolutionized basically like how people view each other. And he said that he would go on long walks like by himself, like just to think. And you were mentioning like people don't want to hear their own voice, but it reminded me when you said that, like, be still and know that I'm God. And when you're listening to all these other voices, and I find myself like always feeling I have to play music, or always feeling like, and I'm like, why do I feel like that? Maybe it's because it's not that I don't want to hear my own voice, or I don't want to hear God's voice speaking to me. So now when I'm like playing all this music, like, or I'm always listening to something or somebody else, it doesn't give God an opportunity to speak to me. And yeah, so I would say like for you, like what would you say are some of the intentions that you've like set that maybe you've kind of, or maybe a better phrase would be like watering the intentions that we have can sometimes like be a struggle. And throughout our journeys, we sometimes have like highs and lows, but how do you consistently, I guess, stay focused on your intention in your journey versus like either the voices of other people or whatever else might be kind of pushing against it?
Yeah. One, I always remember why I do it, because every morning I have affirmations and devotional time to my visions. I look at them every day and say, this is where I'm going. This is who I am. Once you know, that's why I think there's some time in the morning that everyone should have to just be with themselves before even your partner, before to be with God first, and then be with yourself and say, who am I? Where am I going? And remind yourself every day, because the world will push you all types of ways if you're not rooted in that. So first, get rooted in that. That's one thing. I think another thing is getting active, eating right. Those two things will make the biggest. Sleeping. So I'm going to pull this up real quick, because along with my affirmations and like how I look at things in the morning, I also check in with myself for my health and wellness. And I put it into categories. And I say there's about like 7 pillars to health and wellness. So it's exercise, so your physical health. There's sleep, your ability to rest. Nutrition, what are you putting in your body to fuel it? Relationships, what does your connection with other human beings look like? Your spirituality, what is that individual practice that gives you a sense of peace and purpose? And then your financial, what is your ability to gain and maintain resources? And I was like, if I hit all of these, I'm good. Like I know I'm feeling my healthiest. Some days I'm hitting 5 out of 7 of those. Some days I'm hitting 6. Some days I'm only hitting 2. It's like, okay, for those days I'm hitting 2, how do I change that so I can get back to a healthier state, so I can stay aligned with my purpose and be well enough to pursue the things that God has set for me.
I love that. That's awesome. I'm not sure. It sounds like you created that yourself. And I like how you're changing the idea of healthy from just like a physical well-being, but like as a total person. And something interesting is like, I see like you use, even like you were saying, like rooted, like using like words about like plants. And could you describe like, I guess, how strong, like, because this is me being like just curious, how strong are roots? And like when you say like something's rooted and needs to be rooted, like what does that really mean?
Yeah, I only talk in garden terms for some reason. I just noticed that about myself. Seeds, roots. To be rooted in something is to have a foundation, to make sure you understand that whatever you're building, you have to have a solid foundation first. So if that's knowledge of self, it's that your relationship with God, that comes before anything else. So in gardening, a lot of people, when they're watering their plants, they don't think about how the plant actually drinks. You know, they're watering the leaves, the flowers, the top of the plants. your plant's going to die eventually. It's not going to get anything because that's not the foundation of how it drinks. The foundation is the roots. So when you're watering, you're actually watering around the base of the plant because that's where it's absorbing the water. That's where it's absorbing the nutrients. The most important thing to be a great grower, I mean, there's so many important things, but the foundation is a good soil. And a lot of people don't think about that. They think it doesn't matter if you have the best plant, the best seed, the best fertilizer. If your soil is trash, your plant's not going to thrive.
So why do you think that is? Why don't people? Because I guess like to me that seems like it would be like intuitive, right? Like you need like great soil, but I guess why don't people, or from your experience, why don't people, I guess, focus on the soil instead of focusing on the seeds and the plants and all that?
Because the soil is not flashy. You know, you're looking at the fruit. You're looking at the end product. The soil it takes a time to build. It's a slower process than the actual plant growth. You have to dig. You have to get your hands dirty. And the soil is like the work we do inside ourselves. Like if you don't have that foundation, that's not easy work to do. But everything flows through it. So if you don't get that right, then you're constantly going to be wondering, why isn't the fruit as good as it's supposed to be? Why aren't the leaves as healthy as they're supposed to be? It's because the soil is not intact the way it should be.
And I think being on like this Christian walk, I think also like when we were talking about like first, like you should go to God in the morning. I think having that as your foundation, and what I've noticed is like when I don't have time or make time to pray, because I kind of switch my mentality to like I have to like find time to pray and I have to like make time to pray because it's never gonna like just happen itself. Yeah. But like I've realized when I don't really like pray or like spend time with God, my thoughts are different. Like literally like my thoughts are different, like thoughts that I wouldn't have usually, they'll start coming in and I just won't be as maybe peaceful as well. So I would say for you, like obviously I'm not sure if you had the chance, but like Jesus goes through all this talking about like I think when the bird comes and like the thorns and all that. Have you now with your just experience in plants, do you look at anything different in the Bible? I know you mentioned earlier you did, but could you tell us like an example? Because this is interesting to me.
I mean, the story of Joseph is one of my favorite stories, and stewardship. That's kind of my word for the year is stewardship. How do I deal with the resources I have? You know, in the Bible, Joseph has the dream and talks about the 7 years of plenty and then the 7 years of famine. And that's kind of what I'm thinking about right now. And that's most relevant to my life is like, how do I get ready for that greater purpose that's coming down the line? How am I stewarding over the resources God has given me so they can grow and that can help, more importantly, other people? I think people miss that part is like, yeah, you got to store stuff, but you also got to help other people along the way. That's why God's putting you in these higher places. So I know God is going to be putting me in high places. How can I use what I have right now and, you know, take care of that? I'm still like, I wish like I could pull the actual verse. I know the idea behind the verses, but I'm still learning how to like pull those verses. But I know there's one scripture. There's one scripture about taking what it says something about you being able to steward over what you have, the little things first. If you can't steward over that, how can you steward over the big things? You know? And so that's what I'm thinking right now is like, I want all these things later down the line. I want to grow. I want to, you know, have like, for instance, my business, like, did I do everything perfectly when I first started that? No. Like, could I have paid more attention to my clients, done a little bit more, pushed a little bit more? Sure. Like, but I have to steward that in this season right now before I go and get 10 clients or 30 clients. You know what I mean? Like continuing to look at what I have, being grateful for what I have, and then learning from that little bit because it's training wheels for what's coming bigger down the line.
I think training wheels is a great way to put it because I feel like a lot of people will be like praying about something or asking God about something like Father God, give me I want to be wealthy or whatever. But it's like, are you making the actions to try and be wealthy, or like, are you doing anything? Or like, Father, like somebody might pray like, Father God, increase me, and then they get like a 50-cent increase at their job, and they're like, now they're upset about the increase that God's given them. So I think even being like intentional in like what you're asking for as well, but making sure that because God can only, I believe, like give you once you're actually like putting in the work for something appropriately. Because I think just from, not to say that we get things that we don't deserve all the time, but I think in terms of like increasing like stewardship, you have to be able to, like how you mentioned, take care of like what you have. And you said something very interesting. It's like you said that that you're gonna like basically like be successful. How do you know that? And if somebody is, because I think I'm of the similar like idea of, well, that I know like certain things are gonna happen. I'm not sure how, but I also see that there's a lot of people who don't know. I guess, did you figure this out? Did you always have this knowing of who you were going to be? Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, I see the fruit of my labor, and I'm coming with the right intention in this. It's, yes, there's part of this that are self-serving, but for the most part, I'm doing this for the people. I'm doing this because I want to contribute something to society and the community. So I'm coming with good intentions. I know God's got my back, and I'm leaning on him to guide my footsteps. So with that in mind, and there's also the heart, right? I looked at it in a very practical sense too. I looked at all my experience. I look at my dad passing away and me getting more concerned about my health and wellness. I look about the fact that I had construction experience in my Care Force city year years and how that is relevant to what I'm doing now. I looked at the doors that open for me that I'm not pushing open. I think God will tell you where you need to go based off the fruit that appears from the seed you sow. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think like your perspective is something refreshing, something that most people, and I've noticed this just being at like, in, I guess my job, like in the 9 to 5 space, like a lot of people don't really have that perspective on life. Like a lot of people are like negative. A lot of people are like Napoleon Hill calls them like drifters. They're kind of just going through life. Yeah. They don't really have a plan. They don't really know who they are or who God has them to be. I think it all comes down from like ask and you shall receive. A lot of people never ask, and it always reminds me of like when like you hear about the stories, like somebody's like at like the low point and they finally ask like what's the purpose of life, or like, God, where are you? And then I think if you just ask that, God will reveal himself to you as well. And so transitioning to if you could like quickly, I guess, give us, not quickly, but if you could give us a small masterclass, because I think we hit the infinity part, we hit connecting to the land, and there's the beginning part as well. I guess what would that look like for somebody starting out their plant journey? They're listening to you, they're like, I want to be a Black vegan, I want to get into plant-based, or a white vegan too, or whatever type of vegan. But I guess, could you give us like the beginning steps of what that would look like?
If you're trying to increase your health and wellness, the best way to start that is to be outside. I think the starting spot, I think people should go to their community gardens and just help out for one weekend for an hour or two. Gardening is actually a community sport, like, believe it or not. Like, the best way to learn how to grow fast and get access to all those different avenues of health and wellness is to talk to people who are already doing it. So, like, I always tell people, you want to learn how to grow? Volunteer at your community garden or whatever spaces you have, and just talk to people. If you're not necessarily ready for the garden part and you want your avenue is the food part, go to your farmer's market, have a conversation with the farmers, ask them how they grow the food. I think regardless if you have a quote unquote affinity for the land, because I think everyone has a little bit of affinity for the land because everybody eats, so you should know where your food comes from. Talk to the people who are doing the work. It's kind of like podcasting, like do your own mini podcast conversation and talk to the person and say, yo, I'm curious about this. How did you get this? Why are you here? Why are you doing this work? Like, just asking those simple questions begins the journey. And you can start there. Like, not everybody's going to be a gardener, but everybody can get connected to one. Everybody can understand where their food comes from. Not everybody's going to be a chef, but everybody could go to support their local restaurant. Not everybody is going to climb Mount Everest, but everybody can take a walk for 30 minutes a day. So there's always little baby steps you can do.
And I think this is so good because it connects like so well, I believe, just to like life and I would say like Christianity as a whole. Like you were mentioning in terms of like everybody is in some aspect has an affinity, and like the Bible says, like we come from the dust, like we are part of like the earth and all that. So I think what you're saying is absolutely true. And it's also like not everybody has to, like you mentioned, being a chef or a gardener. Not everybody can or should be like a pastor or apostle or whatever your role is in the church, but doesn't mean you can't still learn from them as well. And I think it, like I asked a question, I was like where do you start? And I feel like with everything, it's like you get around that atmosphere, you get around those people who are doing the thing. Like with us in the Standard, we wanted to strive to be more successful, so we got in that atmosphere. And I think sometimes even for me, like asking that question, I was expecting something like more like super deep and all that, but it's always like comes back down to like the simple same thing. Like if you want to grow your faith, find some people who are already strong in their faith and start asking questions, being curious. So
yeah, I'm notorious for that. I'm notorious for like trying to be a master at every single thing, reading all the books, and it's like, you know, the time you took to read the book, you could have had a 15-minute conversation and got the same thing. You know, so it's people.
Yeah, and I'm trying to get over that too, especially like just like coming back from the conference. So me and Christian went to a Standard conference, which is basically like a networking meeting, a networking group, a conference, an event. And like I think that's one of my biggest takeaways is like, don't try and do everything on your own. Just don't be afraid to ask. Like ask and you shall receive, right? So going into the final questions, these are questions that I ask every guest to try and figure out just what is the secret to success, but I guess now kingdom secrets to success. So I would say, what's your definition of success for yourself?
I think it's very simple, but I think it's love. Like love in just different aspects of my life and my relationships, of course, but also love of life by pursuing my purpose, which is connecting people to the land. If I show up and put love into everything I do, I think everything will work out. Love of God and wanting to be a righteous man and a man of God and showing up that way. Love for my own self and my body, going to the gym as much as I can. You know, not everybody, there's people right now who can't use their legs. And so when I don't want to go up and get up and go to the gym, I think it's not that I have to do this, but I want to do this because someone else can't do this. So I think that's the deepest sign of love is just gratitude.
And let's say today's your last day on earth. You have the world's attention. With all the experiences you've had, the conflicts you face, and the lessons you've learned, you are able to tell people 2 things. What would be your advice?
Man, that's a good question. The first thing that in my mind is to plant a tree, plant something for the next generation. That's how you live on. If you're worried about death, do something that's worth having around. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think it goes back to love. Like, love what you have because you never know what tomorrow might bring.
What are 3 habits that have led you to your success?
3 habits that led to my success. Morning devotional time to yourself and God. That's one. I mean, sleep. Sleep is so important. Oh, naps specifically. 15-minute naps. There's another book that I love called The Power of When, and it talks about your chronotype. So what time you go to sleep at, what time you should do just different aspects of life. So there's in that book, it tells you time to take a nap, time to eat based off of your specific chronotype. So that's really good. So 15-minute naps is like a cup of coffee without the jitters and stuff at the end. I will stand on that. Let me see. What's the last one? Gardening. Gardening has changed my life because You get the physical aspect of it. You get to eat what you cultivate, and then you get the lessons, and you also become a steward of the earth. I'm more of an environmental person because of growing food. So I don't use certain chemicals because I know it's going to harm the earth. I try to compost and reduce the waste that I do. So those are other things.
And the last and maybe most important question is, where can listeners find you?
Yeah. So the best way to find me is at Christian_Riddick on all social medias. There's no A in my name. I'm working on the website is in maintenance right now, but it will go back up soon. That's going to be christianriddick.org. And then the podcast, the Afrobeats podcast, beats is spelled like the vegetable, on all streaming platforms.
Christin Riddick, everybody. Awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Case by Case. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to drop a like, follow, or rate on whatever platform you're listening on. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. So if you want to help others prepare for the path to success, don't forget to share this episode on social media so we can reach success together.